I often wonder if people really grasp the fullness of something that they actually say. Uh, this doesn't just go for anybody. I think this also can happen in Christian circles. Now, I'm going to pull up a picture. And it is somebody who, they're obviously of the dispensationalist persuasion. I'm not against dispensationalists. I think it has a lot of good into it. Uh, but there's something in their little paragraph. I do find that dispensationalists, especially those who are, we'll say, a little more obsessed with end times. I didn't really want to use the word obsessed, but I'll use it anyway. Uh, they love charts and everything and pictures and diagrams, trying to show how everything's going to come out, how history's going to play out, how end times are going to play out, and that all thing. But in this particular one, and I don't doubt that this person is a fellow Christian brother or sister, but they do this picture, and there's something in there that I think has a greater consequence than they actually think. I'm going to pull it up here, okay? Here it is. So they're like tribulation now and tribulation to come. So they're like the 69 weeks. So I'm not going to do a big long video here on the 70 weeks of Daniel, but they're like 69 weeks for Israel. Then there was a break, and then the seventh week is the last week is going to come up, which is the final 7 years tribulation, and all that. Now, I don't really want to get into all that. The part that I really want to kind of focus on is this section right here. That section right there. Do you notice it says, Jews rejected Jesus, and he is crucified. As a result, he is unable to establish his kingdom on earth. Church is established, and God's prophetic clock stops after the 69th week. Now, why do I want to draw attention to that? Because there's an underlying assumption there. There's an underlying factor that I don't think they really think about. And it's this idea that says that when Jesus came and it was supposed to be the end times right then and there. In other words, Jesus was supposed to come and establish his whole kingdom, and the kingdom of God would be established there. Jerusalem would be the full capital, and Jesus would be a king, and sin would have been dealt with. It's kind of a fascinating thing. I'm not sure how in that diagram. But you notice it says the Jews rejected Jesus. Now, I'm not going to disagree with that. A lot of the Jews at that time, they rejected Jesus as the Messiah. They still do today. And people today still reject Jesus as Messiah. But so they rejected him. And therefore, he is crucified. So the Jews rejected Jesus and he's crucified. Now, that's historically accurate. Are they completely to blame for it? Absolutely not. They didn't do the crucifixion on their own. They did it under the blessing of Pontius Pilate, and it was the Roman guards that did the actual crucifixion, the actual crucifying. But it says, as a result, he's unable to establish his kingdom. That was the part. He's unable to establish his kingdom. See, there's a problem there. Now, you may not have heard it this way, but you may have heard it a slightly different way in this aspect. And these where they say that the church was God's plan B. Do we understand the concept of a plan B? Do we really? Do you know what plan B means? Plan B means plan A failed. It means plan A didn't work out. If my plan A is I'm going to make a dinner for my wife tonight, and the power goes out or I burn dinner, my plan B is I go and I get takeout. And so therefore my plan A failed. Are we beginning to grasp what the issue is here? And them saying that the church's plan B, or this Christian brother or sister says that Jesus is unable to establish his kingdom, which means plan A was to establish the kingdom right then and there. Therefore, they're basically saying, am I making an assumption a little bit, but I don't think it's a bad one. I think it's the underlying idea here is that God's plans can be thwarted. That God's plan can be thwarted. Or at least suspended. At least put on hold. Obviously, in that diagram, if we go back to it, you take a look. The Jews rejected Jesus, therefore, it says the prophetic clock stopped. So they're talking about the 70 weeks of Daniel. That's what they're doing. It says it stopped. And then God went and did the church. That was his plan B kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, the church is removed because God's going back to his plan A. And that's kind of what they're saying there. You can see that. Here's the 69 weeks. And then they jump over to the 70th week. One week is not 7 days, but 7 years. But it's this idea that God's plans can be thwarted. God's plans can be stopped. That God's plan can be put on pause. This is a bad assumption. Particularly, I'm going to tell you, one of my favorite verses, it comes from the book of Job. The book of Job is wisdom literature, but it's after everything Job's gone through. He kind of says this. Job chapter 42, verse 2. I know that you can do all things. He's talking to God, is who he's talking to. And he says, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. That no purpose of yours can be thwarted. So what about this idea that the Jews rejected Jesus and therefore crucified him, and then Jesus couldn't establish the kingdom? I would say there's a problem there, because that means God's purpose was thwarted for a while, but it also undermines the prophet Isaiah, which talks about how the Messiah was to come. You go through Isaiah, and it talks about the suffering servant. It talks about why the Messiah would come. This was all foretold. The church isn't plan A. The church isn't plan B. The church is part of plan A. What was plan A? The plan A has been the same the whole time. It is God redeeming mankind unto himself. That's what has happened. God chose the Jews to carry out his specific purpose. Yes, he chose the nation of Israel to carry out his purpose. Are they done? No. There is still more to happen. But this idea saying that the Jews rejected Jesus and therefore plan A got put on hold is incorrect. And they may be misspeaking, but the underlying thing there is saying that, well, God's plan could be thwarted for a while, and this isn't true. God's purposes are always done. Even when humanity is kicking and screaming and fighting against God, it will ultimately fulfill his purposes. Go read Isaiah 53 when it talks about the servant. By his wounds, by his stripes we are healed. By his wounds we are forgiven. The cross was the purpose. Jesus, again, what did Jesus say? Jesus said, should I pray that he take me from this world, from this task? He said, no, absolutely not. What did he say? He said, for this reason I came into this world. That's what it was. He wasn't to be rescued from it. He wasn't coming the first time to establish, in this case, the rebuilding of the nation of Israel, in establishing his fullness of his kingdom at that point. Jesus came the first point to pay the penalty for the sin, open the door for us. That's what it was. And it's done for his glory. And in the end, what do we see? We see his mercy. We see his grace. We see it bestowed upon us. This is what it is. And so the question is, do we often think about the underlying notion that is there? What else is taken there? So this idea that the Jews rejected Jesus and Jesus was unable to set up his kingdom, that's a bad assumption. It's a bad thing. It says that God's plans could be thwarted or at least on pause, but that's not true. God is sovereign. God is in control. No plan of God's can be thwarted. God is absolutely sovereign over everything that happens. This is why we can take comfort. This is why we can draw strength, because God's plan is unstoppable. And his plan will come. His plan, like I said, he's not done with Israel yet. Israel still has a part to play in the fullness of the redemption history, the redemption story. But it's going to happen exactly as God foretold. It's going to happen exactly as he foreordained, and it's going to happen exactly for his glory, and it's going to reveal his majesty, his power, his splendor, his grace, and his love to all mankind. That is what's going to take place. Hey, I just want to thank you for watching. If you like the content, want to subscribe, like, tell a friend, get the word out. Also, if you want more content, you can follow me on YouTube, on Rumble, or you can even download the Foundation with Steve Teed podcast and Take Me on the Go, found on almost all podcast apps. This couldn't happen without you, and I encourage you, build on a strong foundation.